Welcome to Matters Financial and Geopolitical from a Frontier. Thank you for stopping by. I'm grateful. I thanked Charles Island for dinner last night at the Sankara, where they've got a new steak restaurant, and it was actually extremely good. And no offence to vegetarians out there. I thank him for dinner. And he said to me as we sat down, Ali Khan, tell me something I don't know. And of course, I'm sort of listening of things. And I said, did you not know any of that? And he said, no, I knew all of that. And I said, why don't you tell me something that I don't know? And he proceeded to tell me a whole lot of things, none of which I knew. And the conversation started from there. I'll put up a photograph of him I took at a Johnny Walker party. There's Chris Kirubi, who now is the proud recipient of a Légion d'honneur from the French government, and Charles as well. Macro thoughts. Jamie McGeever, who I follow, he's from Reuters, and I follow him on Twitter, says, do not adjust your sets. Eurozone inflation 0%, UK inflation minus 0.1%, and Zimbabwe inflation minus 2.6%, which I thought was quite interesting. Ravi tweeted me this morning, good morning, something inspirational from Nelson Mandela, and the quote is, and you'll see it from the Twitter pic that we put up, I learnt that courage was not the absence of fear, but the triumph over it. The brave man is not he who does not feel afraid, but he who conquers that fear. And my favourite photograph of Nelson Mandela is this one, where you find him dancing. It's just such a beautiful photograph, I think. He said many other things, and if I might share some more with you: lead from the back and let others believe they are in front. The greatest glory in living lies not in never failing, but in rising every time we fall. And then I like this, a celebration of hope, a message for Africa. This is in, I think, Santon Square or one of the sort of flagship squares in Johannesburg. And I saw it when I went for the World Cup, and this is what's written at his feet. And I'll put up the photograph. And finally, let me leave you with this quotation. I am fundamentally an optimist. Whether that comes from nature or nurture, I cannot say. Part of being optimistic is keeping one's head pointed toward the sun, one's feet moving forward. There were many dark moments when my faith in humanity was sorely tested, but I would not and could not give myself up to despair. That way lies death and defeat. Isn't he an extraordinary individual, such a powerful figure, the likes of which the continent nor the world has seen. Sky News tweeted, video shows Iraqi soldiers being pulled out of Ramadi before the city fell to Islamic State. This city is just 70 kilometers away from Baghdad. It's the beating heart of the Sunni heartland of Iraq. I think the Iraqi government is going to have to be all hands on deck, including the Iranians. And Bloomberg View is saying Islamic State's capture of Ramadi, capital of Iraq's Sunni Muslim heartland, may well lead to the unraveling of President Barack Obama's Iraq strategy. I don't think it's going to lead to the unraveling, but it brings him into closer and closer collaboration with Tehran. Essentially, if they are really serious about trying to stabilize it. They might not be. Iran is, of course, stepping into the breach, but is being stretched real thin now, which I'm sure was one of the intentions of the Saudi counter-strategy. I like this. President Obama I think he needs to speak to his friends and get them to throttle back, because ultimately ISIS will roll his friends over as well. Ken Roth tweeted that photograph. You'll remember, whoever was elected, please raise your hand. And it's a very pointed remark. Jimmy and 11 tweeted, Palmyra, please God, don't let the barbarians blow all of this to smithereens as they wish to do. I've never been, I've always wanted to go. ISIL a couple of days ago were said to be 2 kilometers away from Palmyra. And I'll put up 2 photographs that I found on Twitter. India's man of the future must break with the past. When he was elected as India's Prime Minister 1 year ago, Narendra Modi earned a handsome mandate for one task above all else: to revive the economy, deliver jobs and prosperity to India's 1.25 billion people. The good news is that Modi remains committed to his vision for India's future, a country with world-class infrastructure, factories, new cities and skilled workers. In India's political economy, it takes some courage to stick to such a modernizing vision, even as the opposition tries to paint the agenda as pro-rich. The mixed news comes on the policy front. Modi's approach to economic reform, dubbed creative incrementalism by his government's chief economic advisor, may not be radical enough to achieve a modern, prosperous India within any reasonable time frame. I think he's going to turn out to be pretty radical. I think creative incrementalism is a clever way of veiling his activism, probably. But he's been crisscrossing the world lately. He's got a huge following on Twitter, and he's been taking selfies with Chinese leaders and really quite engaging in 21st century. But he dresses quite traditionally. Modi's trip to China seeking the Nixon spirit. This is The Economist tweeting a photograph, and then Narendra Modi thanking Xi Jinping, with whom I had an extremely productive meeting earlier today. And in the photograph you see them wandering around that place with all the old statues. It's a fantastic photograph. I point to that. Currency markets, oh my goodness, all over the shop. So let's start with the euro. It was at 111.41 when I popped in. It got way below 111 and it's now back at 111.06. Dollar index, when I came in this morning, 95.36. The Bloomberg dollar index, which tracks the greenback versus 10 major peers, climbed a third day in a row, jumped 0.9% Tuesday, steepest 2-day increase since December 2011. And I think it's got more to go, but it's been a torrid time for the last few weeks. Japanese yen, 120.95 area, popped over 121. Swissy, 0.9364 when I looked last, but I might not be right. Pound, 155.26, firming up here. Aussie, 0.7925 this morning, 63.695 Indian rupee. South Korean won, 1095.28. Rial, 303.39. That's been doing a lot of work around this 3 area. Egypt, 762.75. That had a huge 2-day rally in the Egyptian stock market. And the South African rand, when I checked last, was at 11.9069. But the markets are moving around big time. All kicked off because of a European official. If need be, the front loading may be complemented by some backloading in September, when market liquidity is expected to improve again. And there's been this tremendous correlation between Bund yields, which had spiked extremely high recently, and the euro. As the yields went higher, the euro rallied. And essentially what this official was saying is, we're coming into the market, and because of the seasonality, we might need to buy more bonds, therefore bringing yields lower and softening up the euro. If need be, the front loading may be complemented by some backloading in September, when market liquidity is expected to improve again. I don't know if that explanation made any sense. The slightly higher purchase volume that market analysts may observe in the coming weeks is therefore unrelated to the recent episode of market volatility. Nanex, whose diagrams I do like, tweeted, "Currencies are wild" this morning, and put up this image, and I'll put it up as well so you can have a look at that. Dollar index, I'm putting up a 3-month chart. I think it might have based out. Housing starts jumped a startling 20.2% to 1.14 million on an annualized rate. And you know what? The American consumer might have been saving to buy a house as opposed to spending it in the shops, because retail sales have been very soft. And many people, including myself, thought that the sort of oil stimulus would filter into the consumer. Euro dollar, we're now at 111.17, but I'll put up a 3-month chart, quite a breakdown from those levels above 114. Jamie at Reuters again, euro plunges a cent, and look at this image I'm putting up and think back to that comment I was speaking about front loading. That was coincidental with those comments hitting the screen. But apparently those same comments have been shared the night before. This is Coeur. UK inflation, first time turned negative since 1960. Can you believe that? Minus 0.1% in April. Yahoo shares fell 7.6% on Tuesday on concerns that a possible change in US tax regulations would affect Yahoo's planned spin-off of its stake in Alibaba Group Holdings. And Nanex again, close-up of 9 seconds when Yahoo hit a springboard. And you can see what happened then. Brand Tasmania tweeted a glittering night sky over Tasmania, Australia, photo by Fury. Stars in the Milky Way, and it is glittering. And made me think of my friend, the Australian High Commissioner, who's now returned to Australia, and he's in charge of the climate change effort. And if you know Australia's current political orientation around climate change, it's a thankless task. Good friend, and was from Tasmania. Gold, we're now trading at 12.08. I think it's headed for a big fall, and I think it's been uplifted a little bit by people considering the risk of Brexit and those sorts of risks, and of taking gold higher. But I think it's overcooked here. Crude oil, big sell-off yesterday, sank 3.7% in New York. But then now we've got a big rebound going again. And we're just below $59. Look, I think there's an important double top already at 62 and change. I want to be short for a run down to below 50. But, trading oil has been very interesting, very algorithmic it seems. Lots of accounts who just come and just munch you. And I think what it tells us is there are big macro portfolio flows driving around the market. So I'm bearish, but I think you can pop higher to that 62 level again before it starts going down properly. Goldman Sachs have turned bearish. Sub-Saharan Africa, WHO, African region, mass population displacements from Burundi have peaked in the last few days, with 500 to 2,000 refugees seeking asylum in Tanzania per day. It's a big number, isn't it? The Burundian president has delayed parliamentary elections by 1 week. Pierre Nkurunziza has signed a decree delaying parliamentary and local council elections by 1 week to June the 2nd because of the political crisis gripping the East African state, his advisor said. Burundian police fired tear gas and beat protesters who were demanding President Pierre Nkurunziza end his bid for a third term. That was Yahoo, that was yesterday. The President Zuma says voting should be postponed indefinitely until there's stability, which would allow the elections to be free and fair. And Harun Mutaso, who's been a great resource recently, well, she is always actually, Musaga protesters with their version of weapons. It's pretty tragic when you see what she's showing. Congolese President Joseph Kabila, who of course himself had to back down not too long ago, called for a national dialogue to discuss creating an environment that will enable peaceful elections set to take place through 2016. A lot of people speculate that he was keen to stay on. South Sudan rebels urge oil fields to shut down as clashes escalate. South Sudanese rebels on Tuesday asked oil companies operating in Upper Nile State to close operations as clashes with government troops escalated, threatening to bring the country's entire crude production to a standstill. They're making peanuts anyway, so it hardly makes any difference. Rebel spokesman James Dak said rebel fighters had moved within 10 kilometers of the Paloch oil fields and urged companies to shut down operations and evacuate staff. My conclusions are this: the trajectory is one of a death spiral of mutually assured destruction. I'll put up a photograph of the River Nile I took 1,996 days ago in Juba. and another one of the VIP room at Juba Airport 1,996 days ago. Going by the latest photograph that Jason Strasuzio tweeted, the airport seems to have changed a bit. Moody's broadly stable outlook for sub-Saharan African sovereign credit quality despite global headwinds. Positive outlooks for Côte d'Ivoire and Senegal, exemplifying the potential for rating upgrades in the region over the next 12 to 18 months. At the same time, weaker commodity prices are slowing growth, exacerbating macro-financial imbalances, as is most acutely reflected in Moody's negative outlooks on Angola and Ghana. I think Ghana is turning around, frankly. Moody's expects sub-Saharan African growth to slow to around 4.5% to 4.75% this year, the second consecutive year of deceleration. Still, SSA will remain the world's second fastest growing region in 2015 after developing Asia, with growth remaining substantially above the global average of close to 3%. And this was, I think I mentioned it before, but let's just mention it again. Oil exporters contributed around half of sub-Saharan Africa's total GDP in 2014, so you can see the effect of that. Risk of social unrest, which I've spoken about previously, and I think is vastly underestimated by most people's models. The risk of social unrest remains due to a number of factors: long-standing presidential incumbents without political succession plans, absence of strong political institutions, restive militaries, ethnic tensions, income inequality, young and economically disenfranchised population, that's the key point, are amongst all connected as well, are amongst a host of challenges confronting governments in the region. According to the FT, and this is interesting, foreign direct investment in Africa surged. Africa is the world's fastest growing region for FDI, according to a report from FDI Intelligence. In a year when the global greenfield FDI market grew a paltry 1%, Africa enjoyed a 65% increase in capital investment in 2014 over the previous year to an estimated $87 billion, so a huge surge. Capital investment into North Africa more than doubled from $10 billion to $26 billion, while sub-Saharan Africa saw its investment levels rise from $42 billion to $61 billion. That's a very interesting report. Egypt topped the league table for capital investment. A lot of money's come in, mostly from the Gulf countries. Angola was second, attracted $16 billion more in 2014 than 2013, but I think that's going to be undone now by the price of oil. Mozambique, Morocco saw big increases. Mozambique, where the IMF is forecasting 7% GDP growth for 2015, attracted $9 billion in capital investment last year. That's a very, very big story, actually. South African All Shares, the best performing stock index in sub-Saharan Africa, up 10.68% so far this year. South Africa's competition watchdog said Tuesday it had opened an investigation into foreign currency price fixing by several international banks, including Citigroup, Barclays, JP Morgan, Chase, and Standard Chartered. They're accusing them of colluding via electronic messages to coordinate their activities and charge an agreed price when quoting customers buying or selling rates. And I think it's really not possible because the rand is one of the most volatile currencies in the world. And, to have that kind of, you need a quieter market than you've got in dollar rand. Dollar rand, when I checked last, was 11.9069. Egyptian stock market has rallied 7.46% over the last two sessions. The Nigerian All Shares up 3.18% year to date. Ghana Stock Exchange is up 3.15% year to date. Ethiopia plans export hubs with $10 billion factory parks. This is a Bloomberg report, well worth reading. Ethiopia targeting $1 billion of annual investment in industrial parks over the next decade to boost exports and make it Africa's top manufacturer. A special advisor to the Prime Minister said. Government may invest half of the $10 billion needed for zones across the country that will house textile, leather, agro-processing and other labour-intensive factories. In terms of industrial development and manufacturing development, we want to put Ethiopia number one in Africa, and certainly a lot of people feel they are. A lot of detail around that, well worth reading that report in full. Tanzanian shilling has dropped to a record low on declining gold exports. Lack of inflows into the economy, a lot of pressure on the shilling. Gold shipments dropped 13% this year through March 31st. Currency was trading at 2,030. That's the lowest since at least December 1988. Shilling is the worst performer this year after the cedi. Has lost exact data. It's retreated 15% in 2015. Ed Pomfret tweeted, Somalia remittances are more than development, humanitarian aid and FDI combined, which is an interesting point. Africa's fisheries paradise at a crossroads, says Greenpeace. Highly critical of China. Chinese DWF companies' activities contribute little to China's overall overseas investments. Chinese government must urgently reform its DWF regulatory framework. They're saying Chinese companies are overfishing, flouting rules with quasi-impunity for decades around West Africa. Put up a photograph of Ali the navigator who took us to Orsini Island because I felt like it because of the idea of the sea. GE says to lose Angola locomotive deal if Exim Bank closes. It would be gone, said the GE Transportation Unit President Russell Stokes. Rwanda's Crystal Telecoms are offering Kenya's shares in an IPO. Crystal Telecom is a Rwandan vehicle which holds shares in MTN Rwanda. And essentially you're buying into that. Kenya Sub-Saharan Mining tweeted search for East Africa's crude oil pipeline builder to start in 6 months. And put up a good diagram for us to look at. Mandare tweeted Jomo Kenyatta secured an emergency drill this morning at Kenya at the airport, and certainly some of my friends were panicking. Apparently there was a hijacking drill and a couple of other things, and everyone thought it was for real. Kenya's shilling, just before I started doing this podcast, was trading at 97. This was we traded just above 97, not to last week. We don't want to go above this level. And I wrote about this when I said the central bank is in a delicate position over the weak shilling. And then I said everyone I meet is concerned, and a push above 100 would drive a stake through the bullish Kenya narrative. I think people would lose a lot of confidence if that happened. Nairobi all shares up 3.032% so far this year, bounced 0.21% yesterday. NSE 20 remains down 3.345% so far this year, bounced 0.19%. We've been in a bearish market. It'll be interesting to see how prices react today. Centum have issued an investment information memorandum. This is for their 2 fixed rate note bond and a senior unsecured equity linked note. If you're interested in those details, those are under Rich Wrap-Ups and under Centum. Canal Cobalt is to set up a lubricants blending plant in Mombasa. Equity Bank's CEO James Mwangi has resigned from the Britain board. There's been a massive, we do a lot of data mining and social media monitoring, and there's been a massive social media storm over Nakumat's pricing of goods, where it's transpired that, when you see a price on the shelf and then you go and pay a price, there's always a bias to a higher price being paid at the till. And everyone crowdsourced this, and it shows you how this place is changing, I tell you. And 3 things here. The bottom line is Nakumatt are either totally incompetent, that they're not noticing this was going on, or they're complicit. So neither answer is a good one. And then the way they managed it, because this is a real-time challenge, and we were watching it all happen, was interesting of its own, but massive brand damage out of this, I think. Yesterday, as I said, the NSE bounced, the NSE 20 bounced 9.38 points, the all share fell 0.35 points. Better demand for the big cap stocks. Safaricom has now bounced 1.52% over the last 2 sessions. Kenya Airways rebounded 4.34% yesterday. KCB rallied very strongly, 1.72%, and I see that even today it's followed through. And the violence of that rebound speaks to the bullish momentum for the stock. Standard Chartered was a big gain of 4.59%. Centum actually has been better offered of late. I think people are concerned about the bet size now that's being placed. So it's been a little bit softer. And EABL the senator story is a positive one, but yeah, as I told Charles, I said, when do you expect it to hit earnings? He said, look, it's going to take 2 years because, of course, the infrastructure was all stood down, and now you've got to stand it up again. Once again, thank you for stopping by. I am grateful.